Hello there, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're talking about something many of us take for granted, freedom of speech. It's a wonderful concept, isn't it? The idea that you can say what you think, critique your leaders, and share information without fear of being thrown into a windowless van. Many countries even write it into their constitutions, holding it up like a shiny trophy of democratic achievement. They'll stand at international podiums, puffing out their chests and declaring their unwavering commitment to open discourse. It all sounds terribly noble, doesn't it? Almost as noble as a golden retriever attempting to do your taxes. The problem is, for a staggering number of people, that constitutional promise is about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. It's pure fiction. Behind the grand declarations and the carefully worded laws lies a grim reality of censorship, surveillance, and brutal suppression. It's one thing to say, "We love free speech." It's another thing entirely to not arrest someone for making a meme about the president's unfortunate haircut. The gap between what these governments say and what they actually do is wide enough to drive a fleet of censorship trucks through, which, as it turns out, is exactly what many of them are doing. So tonight, we're going to peel back the curtain on this grand illusion. We're going to take a journey through the top 10 countries where the concept of free speech is, to put it mildly, a sick joke. These are the places where a tweet can land you in prison, where journalists are treated as enemies of the state, and where the government's favorite search engine is your private message history. So buckle up, because this is a sobering look at the places where speaking your mind is the most dangerous thing you can do. Let's begin. Kicking off our list is a country that has turned censorship into a high-tech art form, China. Now, China's constitution technically guarantees freedom of speech, which is a bit like a lion guaranteeing the safety of a gazelle it's currently eating. The reality on the ground is a sprawling dystopian surveillance state. The infamous Great Firewall blocks thousands of foreign websites from news outlets to social media platforms, creating a sanitized, government-approved version of the internet. It's like the regular internet, but with all the interesting bits surgically removed, leaving only state propaganda and cat videos. And even the cat videos are probably being monitored. This isn't just about blocking websites, it's about controlling the conversation. Any online discussion of sensitive topics, the 3 Ts of Tiananmen, Tibet and Taiwan for example, is scrubbed from existence by an army of censors. Citizens are encouraged to use apps like WeChat for everything, which, surprise surprise, is heavily monitored. Post the wrong thing, and you could face anything from losing your job to a visit from state security. It's a system where self-censorship becomes a survival mechanism. You don't just have to worry about what you say, you have to worry about what you think about saying. It is, in short, terrifying. If China is a high-tech prison, North Korea is an old-school dungeon with no windows and the key thrown away. In the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, a name that contains at least 2 and arguably 3 lies, there is no concept of free speech. There is only state speech. All media, and I mean all of it, is controlled by the government. The news tells citizens only what the supreme leader wants them to hear, which usually involves him personally inventing burritos, or landing a unicorn on the moon. Information from the outside world is completely illegal. Owning a foreign film or an unapproved radio could land you and your entire family in a labor camp. The control is absolute and generational. From birth, North Koreans are indoctrinated with a cult of personality around the Kim dynasty. There is no alternative narrative. Dissent isn't just punished, it's considered an existential hereditary crime. Expressing a critical thought is not just disagreeing with a policy, it's an act of treason against the divine leadership. The state's grip is so total that for many citizens, the idea of questioning the regime is as alien as the concept of Wi-Fi. It's a society hermetically sealed from reality where the only voice allowed is the one that praises its own cage. Next up is the Islamic Republic of Iran, a country where the authorities have a deeply complicated relationship with the internet. On one hand, they know it's essential for modern life. On the other, they're utterly terrified of what people might do with it, like, for instance, organize protests or share opinions that don't perfectly align with the supreme leaders. The result is a constant, brutal crackdown on any form of online expression. Journalists, bloggers, and activists are routinely arrested, charged with vague crimes like spreading propaganda against the system or insulting Islamic sanctities. These are charges so broad you could use them to arrest someone for complaining about the weather. The government regularly blocks social media platforms, especially during times of unrest, in a desperate attempt to stop the flow of information. And yet, Iranians are incredibly resilient, using VPNs and other tools to bypass the censorship. But the regime is always fighting back, pushing for a national, state-controlled internet that would effectively sever the country from the global web. This isn't just about controlling political speech, it's about controlling social expression, particularly for women and minorities, whose voices are systematically silenced. In Iran, the battle for free speech is being fought tweet by tweet, post by post, against a regime armed with the power to simply pull the plug. Welcome to Saudi Arabia, a kingdom where oil flows freely, but opinions most certainly do not. The country operates under an absolute monarchy, and the House of Saud does not take kindly to criticism. In fact, it has made criticizing the government, the king, or the state's interpretation of Islam a crime punishable by imprisonment, flogging, or even death. The late journalist Jamal Khashoggi is the most chilling and infamous example of what happens when you dare to speak out. But his case is just the tip of a terrifying iceberg. Countless activists, scholars, and ordinary citizens are languishing in prison for doing nothing more than tweeting a dissenting view. The state's control extends deep into the digital realm. The government employs a massive electronic army to monitor social media, flood it with pro-regime propaganda, and hunt down critics. Laws are incredibly broad and severe. The counter-terrorism law, for example, can be used to prosecute anyone who disturbs public order, a term so vague it could apply to complaining about traffic. It creates a climate of profound fear, where even private conversations are fraught with risk. In Saudi Arabia, silence isn't just golden, it's a state-mandated survival strategy. The message is simple and brutal: your thoughts are not your own. Russia. A country with a long and storied history of, shall we say, managing public opinion. Under Vladimir Putin, the space for free expression has shrunk dramatically. The Kremlin has systematically dismantled or co-opted nearly all independent media outlets. Television, the main source of news for most Russians, is now a relentless fire hose of state propaganda, painting a picture of a glorious Russia besieged by a hostile West. Journalists who dare to report the truth, especially about corruption or the war in Ukraine, face harassment, arrest, and sometimes violence. The term foreign agent is now weaponized to stigmatize any media or organization that receives even minimal funding from abroad. And then there are the laws. Russia has passed a suite of legislation designed to suffocate dissent. There are laws against fake news, which basically means any information the government disagrees with. There are laws against disrespecting the authorities, which is a fantastically thin-skinned piece of legislation, and protesting is virtually impossible without official permission, which is rarely granted for any demonstration critical of the government. The goal is to create an information vacuum where the Kremlin's narrative is the only one available, and any attempt to puncture it is treated as an attack on the state itself. For a time, Turkey seemed to be on a more democratic path. That time is, to put it mildly, over. Under President Erdogan, Turkey has become one of the world's leading jailers of journalists. The government has used a failed coup attempt in 2016 as a pretext to launch an unprecedented crackdown on the press and any perceived opponent. Hundreds of media outlets have been shut down, and thousands of journalists, academics, and civil servants have been fired or imprisoned, often on dubious terrorism charges. Simply reporting on sensitive issues like the Kurdish conflict or government corruption can be enough to land you in a cell. The government's reach extends to the digital world. Social media platforms are under immense pressure to comply with government takedown requests or face massive fines and bandwidth throttling, effectively making them unusable. A new law even requires platforms like Twitter and Facebook to appoint a local representative who is legally liable for content, essentially making the companies agents of state censorship. It's a comprehensive strategy to control the narrative by intimidating, imprisoning, and silencing anyone who steps out of line, turning the once vibrant Turkish media landscape into a shadow of its former self. Since President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi came to power, Egypt has experienced a human rights crisis, and at the heart of it is, a ferocious assault on freedom of speech. The government has effectively outlawed protest, tightly controlled the press, and arrested thousands of people for their political opinions. The media landscape is now dominated by companies and individuals with close ties to the state and its intelligence agencies. Independent journalism has been all but eradicated, with reporters facing constant threats of arrest and prosecution under vaguely worded laws against spreading false news or joining a terrorist group. The crackdown is particularly harsh online. The authorities monitor social media and messaging apps, targeting activists, artists, and even ordinary citizens for posts deemed critical of the government. A 2018 cybercrime law grants the government the power to block websites and social media accounts with more than 5,000 followers if they are deemed a threat to national security. This has created a pervasive atmosphere of fear, where Egyptians are forced to self-censor to avoid the state's wrath. In Sisi's Egypt, the public square has been shuttered, and the digital square is under constant siege. Vietnam is a one-party state, and the Communist Party of Vietnam has absolutely no intention of letting anyone challenge its authority. While the country has, embraced a market economy, it has maintained an iron grip on political freedoms. The Constitution might pay lip service to free speech, but honestly, the reality is dictated by a slew of national security laws that criminalize any activity deemed to oppose the party. This includes writing critical blogs, participating in peaceful protests, or even just discussing politically sensitive topics online. The state controls all traditional media, newspapers, television, and radio, ensuring they function as little more than party mouthpieces. With internet penetration booming, the government has focused its repressive efforts online. A sophisticated cyber warfare unit known as Force 47 is tasked with spreading pro-government propaganda and attacking dissenting voices. The country's cybersecurity law, similar to those in China and Egypt, requires tech companies to store user data locally and hand it over to the government on request, effectively eliminating online privacy. Bloggers and activists who manage to get their message out are frequently arrested and given long prison sentences, sending a clear and chilling message to anyone else who might consider speaking up. Nestled in Eastern Europe, Belarus is often called Europe's last dictatorship, and it more than lives up to the name. President Alexander Lukashenko has been in power since 1994, and he has maintained his rule by systematically crushing all opposition and independent thought. The state media presents a fantasy world of stability and prosperity under his wise leadership, while the few remaining independent news outlets are relentlessly persecuted. Following the fraudulent 2020 election, the regime unleashed a brutal crackdown of staggering proportions. Journalists were arrested, beaten, and had their credentials revoked. Newsrooms were raided and shut down. The government has gone to extraordinary lengths to silence dissent, including famously forcing down a civilian airliner to arrest a dissident journalist who was on board, an act of state-sponsored air piracy. Protesting is effectively illegal, and any public display of opposition, even wearing the red and white colors of the protest movement, can lead to arrest. The internet is heavily controlled and frequently shut down during protests to prevent coordination. In Belarus, the state's message is clear: there is no alternative, there is no opposition, and there is no free speech. And finally, we arrive at our number 10 spot, a country that is often called the North Korea of Africa, Eritrea. This is a nation in a permanent state of emergency, ruled by President Isaias Afwerki since its independence in 1993. There is no constitution, no legislature, and no independent judiciary, and it should go without saying there is absolutely no independent press. All media is state-owned and serves as a direct propaganda tool for the regime. In fact, Eritrea has the grim distinction of being the worst country in Africa for press freedom, having imprisoned dozens of journalists, many of whom have been held incommunicado for decades without trial. Their fate remains unknown. Information is so tightly controlled that most citizens have no access to the internet. For the tiny minority who do, it is a slow dial-up service that is heavily monitored. There are no private mobile data providers. The government's justification for this total control is the ongoing, unresolved conflict with neighboring Ethiopia, but the result is a population completely isolated from the outside world and utterly terrified of speaking out. To be a journalist or a dissident in Eritrea is to risk disappearing forever into a network of secret prisons. It is perhaps the most complete information black hole on the planet. So there you have it. 10 countries where the promise of free speech is nothing but a cruel mirage. From the high-tech surveillance of China to the brutal old-school repression of Eritrea, the methods may differ, but the goal is the same: to silence dissent, control the narrative, and maintain power at all costs. For millions of people living in these nations, the simple act of expressing an opinion, a right that many of us exercise thoughtlessly every single day, is a life-altering risk. It's a fundamental human right enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, yet for so many, it remains a distant, almost unimaginable dream. The bravery of the journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens who continue to speak out in these places is truly staggering. They risk their freedom, their safety, and their lives to share the truth. Their struggle is a stark reminder that freedom of speech is not a given. It is not a permanent fixture of a society. It is fragile, it is precious, and it must be constantly defended. In our own societies, where we are fortunate enough to have this right, it can be easy to become complacent, to take it for granted, or even to abuse it. So let this be a call not just to awareness, but to action in our own lives. Value your right to speak. Protect it fiercely. Use it responsibly. Support independent journalism, challenge disinformation, and engage in respectful debate, even with those you disagree with. Because the moment we stop valuing our freedom of expression is the moment we start down the path toward losing it. And as we've seen tonight, that is a dark and silent road. Thank you for watching.